All right, we're going to go ahead and get started here this evening. Welcome to all of you who will view the little video here that we're going to do tonight. We're going to talk about the pest management project. But before we do that, I just want to go over a little bit of information on the information about the project, and then we'll talk a little bit more in detail about what's expected of the project. So, with that, my hope is that when you complete the project, you'll be able to explain what pests are and give examples of them, know where they're found, know about the impacts of them on the environment and on us, talk about cost benefits associated with controlling them, okay, give examples of beneficial insects, and then describe how IPM or integrated pest management works. So those are your objectives. Okay, let's take a few minutes here and talk a little bit about pest management before we talk about the project. Okay, so when you think about pest management, um, I've talked to a couple of students recently, and the word DDT comes up a lot. Okay, um, so the pesticide, more commonly known as DDT, was used very heavily from World War One up until about the early 70s. Okay, DDT actually now is banned because of its extremely numerous environmental impacts. Okay, one obviously was the endangerment to our American bald eagle. Okay, um, now, when we talk about DDT, it doesn't mean that it's gone from the history books. It's still used in developing countries, um, for those countries that are having issues with malaria. Malaria is a bloodborne illness that's carried by mosquitoes. Okay, but when you think about pesticides, okay, um, you probably hear it more and more frequently that as a means to control pests, we need to use chemical methods, chemical pesticides as a means to eradicate a lot of pests um, in the environment. Okay, so when you think about where are pests found, okay, really there are five main places in the environment that we talk about it. Okay, pests are effective to our crops. Okay, they affect our livestock. They affect homes and lawns and gardens. Okay, they can affect the interior of our homes. Okay, and they're just, excuse me, found in the general environment as well. So those are really points where we think about when we think about controlling pests, where they are in the environment. So how do we control them? Okay, to help us control pests, chemicals have been developed. These pesticides have been developed, and there's different categories of them. There's insecticides, which are exclusively for insects. There's herbicides, which, when we think of pests, we don't just think of pests as insects, but we have to think of pests as anything that essentially causes a nuisance, if you will, um, to our environmentally normal way of life. It's something that's harmful or unwanted. Okay, we have herbicides to control weeds. We have fungicides to control different kinds of fungus, and then we have rodenticides, which help to control rodents like rats and mice. Okay, um, so there's advantages and there's disadvantages, of course. Okay, the advantages obviously that um, they save lives. We can increase our food production, and they're profitable. Okay, but there's disadvantages in that they can be very harmful to wildlife and to people. Sometimes these pesticides can kill non-target organisms, and many times they pollute our water supply. Okay, and that's been something that we discussed earlier in the year in our earlier project about having a sustainable water supply. Okay, so when you think about that, okay, um, when you compare those advantages and disadvantages, really you need to be aware, and you need to have an awareness for the effects and determine if the pros outweigh the cons. Okay, now there are alternatives. Okay, there are widespread disadvantages that have led us to look for alternatives. Okay, so some alternatives like cultivation practices and biological control, and looking at genetic resistance and cultural practices and natural chemicals have all been investigated numerously throughout the years to kind of help us give a means um, to tier our response to pests. Okay, so with that, um, the development of IPM, or integrated pest management, um, it's an approach that relies heavily on information about these pests and how they interact with their environment in a way to control them, that is specific, that will reduce damage, to what many believe is an economically tolerable level, um, while at the same time being able to reduce our use of pesticides. Okay, so when you think about implementing an IPA program, it has to be tremendously beneficial to the environment. Okay, and the techniques are often very specific. To the region that you're applying the program to. So that means that every state and every country, and every county needs its own workforce, of experts who can make recommendations about developing a sound IPM program. So that's really, um, the crux of this lesson. So now let's take that and talk a little bit about how that relates to the project. Okay, so in the lesson it talked about, we just discussed the different types of alternatives, um, to pesticides: cultivation practices, biological control, genetic resistance, cultural practices. Okay, what you're now going to do is you're going to place each of the following below, and you can copy this table or you can create your own table. You're going to place each of these phrases here, okay, and there's 9 of them, into the correct column within the table. Okay, all the phrases will only be used once. Okay, so then once you've submitted that table, okay, um, you can either copy and paste it, or you can put it, you can put it into a Word document. Okay, and then what you're going to do after that is, I want you to give me your rationale, okay, based on this as to why you placed them there. Okay, so it's a very simple project. All you're doing, cutting and pasting this table, taking the phrases and placing them into the appropriate column, and then, give me your rationale as to why. It can be, a very simple one sentence rationale, for each as to why, and that's it. Okay. If you have any problems with this, you get stuck on something, please come into the VO and let me know. I'm here all week until Thursday at 3, and we'll be back here next week. We're getting towards the end, of the semester, in terms of projects. So, if there's anything that you need from me as we move towards the end, I would certainly encourage you to reach out to me, email, phone call, the virtual office, so that I can help facilitate getting Part A complete for you. And then, once we come back here towards the end of January, beginning of February, we're going to be moving into new material in Part B. So, with that, have a great week, everyone, and I look forward to seeing you here next Monday.